The room smelled like old leather and polished wood when the lawyer cleared his throat. Medals lined the walls. Men who had commanded armies sat stiff in their chairs. I stood near the window, invisible by design. I wasn't supposed to matter. Then the lawyer read the line, "His only granddaughter." The words landed wrong, heavy. Every chair creaked as heads turned. Eyes measured me like a mistake in a ledger. The lawyer looked straight at me. "Do you know who your biological parents are?" That was the moment the past stopped being quiet. I had spent my life learning how to disappear. In boardrooms I spoke last. In meetings I took notes. The general taught me that. Power survives by staying underestimated. He never called me granddaughter in public, just child, a courtesy, a kindness, or so I thought. The CEO had sneered 3 days earlier, leaning back in his chair like a king bored with loyalty. "You're outdated. We're done here." I remember nodding, calm, controlled, understood. He thought he had fired an employee. He had just insulted an heir. The general raised me without raising questions. Elite schools, no last name that connected, no photographs on desks. I was the shadow that carried his documents, the girl who poured tea while men planned wars and mergers. He tested me constantly. Silence tests, patience tests, betrayal hypotheticals whispered like bedtime stories. "Never avenge in anger," he used to say. "A calm hand cuts deeper." I loved him for that discipline. I loved him because he never lied. He just waited. When he died, I assumed I would return to being nothing. That was my first mistake. The lawyer didn't repeat the question. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were DNA reports, birth certificates amended by court order, a trust structure so complex it felt like a confession written in legal code. My parents hadn't abandoned me. They had been erased. The general's only son had married beneath his rank. The board didn't approve. The family didn't approve. The accident report was clean. Too clean. I felt the shift then. The exact second grief hardened into intent. I didn't cry. I calculated. I went back to work the next morning, freshly fired, freshly invisible. That's when planning became breathing. I pulled archived emails the CEO thought were buried, watched security footage from years ago, traced shell companies back to a private fund that looked harmless until you followed the dividends. The general had taught me where to look. The retirement trust was his masterpiece, quiet, dormant, built for patience. I had signed documents for it years ago without reading the fine print. I read it now. Beneficiary control transferred on proof of lineage, proof I now possessed. I waited. The CEO's voice echoed in my head as I notarized the final document. Outdated. I activated the trust at 2:17 a.m. No drama, no announcement, just a shift in voting power that slid beneath the market like a blade under ribs. By Monday morning, the board convened an emergency meeting. The agenda was short. Panicked. Who just fired the person who owned 76% of the shares? I watched the live stream from my kitchen, coffee cooling untouched. Men I had served papers to were suddenly sweating through $1,000 suits. They couldn't find me in the building. I wasn't there to be seen. The confrontation wasn't loud. It never is when power changes hands. The CEO called me himself. No sneer this time. "You planned this." I let the silence answer. "You knew," he said. "Yes." "You waited." "Yes." He swallowed. I could hear it. The board voted him out before lunch. I didn't attend. The will reading ended with no applause, just silence thick with recalibration. The general's closest officers wouldn't meet my eyes. They had known, or suspected, or chosen not to ask. The lawyer closed the folder. "The general anticipated resistance," he said. "There are contingencies." Of course there were. The estate funded a public inquiry into the accident. Names surfaced. Careers ended. The truth didn't roar. It seeped, unavoidable. Justice doesn't need volume. I stood alone at the general's grave that evening. No flowers, no audience. "I understand now," I said aloud, "why you waited." The wind moved through the trees like approval. He hadn't raised me to inherit comfort, he raised me to correct history. I returned to the company weeks later, not as staff, not as savior, as owner. The same halls, different gravity. People stood when I entered rooms they once ignored me in. I corrected no one. Power doesn't require reminders. I kept the CEO's old chair. It's useful to remember where arrogance sits. This isn't about revenge. That's too small a word. This is about alignment, about restoring what was deliberately broken, about knowing exactly when to speak and when to let systems do the screaming. They thought I was nothing because I never announced myself. The general taught me better. Real power doesn't arrive loudly.